We want to know just how bad power creep has been in Commander over the past 10 years, so we did a bunch of research to figure that out.
I'm Mia, and I like getting super snugly under blankets.
I'm BZ. I love cranking up the heat when I don't have to pay for it. We're the Nitpicking Nerds. We are sponsored by an amazing website, actually. You might have heard this one before. CardKingdom.com. When you ship your stuff to them, if you're selling your cards, they will give you very fair rates. And if you are buying from them, if you hit $50, you get free shipping, which I know some other sites can't say.
I really love the fact that you get one order delivered to your house fast and the free shipping. That's an amazing deal, and I just really love having that convenience. So if you do also want to put an order into Card Kingdom, use the link below and tell them we sent you. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order.
That's money that you already worked for, so why not save it as you spend it on things that you want? Also, Moxfield, guess what? You're going to hear from them later. Guess when? I dare you. And we can just get into what we've been doing.
There's always a lot of talk about power creep in Magic and Commander specifically, but how much? We want to examine that. So we've looked at the power creep over the last 10 years compared to the 10 years before that. So we're looking at 2004 to 2013 versus 2014 to now, and comparing the cards that are pretty similar or go in similar slots to see which one wins out in power.
Yeah, we're going to have a bunch of head-to-head matchups. We're going to tell you which set of cards we think prevails over the other set of cards. It'll give us a good idea. We can't compare every card from that 10 years, from that decade to this decade. We can't do that, but we can compare the most played, the best of the best, and we'll see who emerges on top after we have 10 heats here. And the first one is ramp. So we're going to start out with 2004 to 2013. There's a couple different categories. The fast mana category is the first one. Pretty barren for this decade. They didn't try it too much. Really, the only thing I could find was Mox Opal. Mox Opal's pretty good, but what are we comparing it to?
We're comparing it to Jeweled Lotus and Mox Amber. Jeweled Lotus is one of the Commander staples nowadays, considering it's been as high as, $90 even right after a reprint. Mox Amber and Mox Opal are both very situational, I find, but Mox Amber can go in more decks than Mox Opal.
I actually think Mox Opal's slightly stronger than Mox Amber, but I think Jewel Lotus existing just crushes it. And we're trying to keep these categories even, but there really just wasn't much there for the fast mana. But we can move to signets and rocks here. For 2004 to 2013, we have Springleaf Drum, all 10 guild signets, and Cold Steel Heart as the main heavy hitters. Compared to now, we've got Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, and the Enemy Talismans. It's an interesting little matchup.
I think Arcane Signet is one of those cards that's better than any singular card in the 2004 to 2013 sphere. However, the fact that there's so many more of them in that time space makes it so that that category kind of wins out over the more recent ones.
Yeah, I really think the last decade, the older decade, has the numbers game. We've gotten a few riffs on it, but Arcane Signet was their only new signet thing. They did the Enemy Talismans, they finished out that cycle. The original Ally Talismans are older than the older decade we're talking about. They're super old. They're in 20 years ago. But the Thought Vessel, Arcane Signet, they haven't experimented with 2-mana, make colored mana since Arcane Signet, so it's a little bit lacking in the new, so we had to give it to the old.
Ramping up to actual land ramp, in the older category, we have Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, and Sakura Tribe Elder, also known as Steve. I feel like these are often still played very, very much in Commander.
Yeah.
Compared to 2014 to now, which we have Springbloom Druid and Pier's Whim. They do have their homes, but I do think that the older ones win out considering their versatility.
Yeah, we chalk in Elvish Rejuvenator into the new category. Add that onto the list, but I still think, and maybe we have to go more on what the general consensus is. I think the community would say that Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Steve beats out Springbloom, Pier's Whim, and Elvish Rejuvenator, especially since Pier's Whim is pretty specific. It only finds your best land. It doesn't just ramp you. It's a little bit more expensive. Next up for Mana Dorks. This was kind of a landslide, actually. Elvish Mystic, Deathrite Shaman, and Bloomtender are the ones we chose from the older decade, but there's even more. There was Avacyn's Pilgrim and a couple other 1-mana dorks, and all we have in the last decade was Delighted Halfling somehow. That's pretty much all we got. I mean, you could say Gilded Goose, but that's a little wrong.
I definitely agree with that. Delight Halfling is one card that is better than any singular card in the old one for Commander. However, the fact that there are sheer numbers really play into the part that category wins overall.
Next, I sort of put a miscellaneous category just to catch all the bangers that we missed. For the olden days, it was really kind of just Nykthos. Nykthos was the one that stood out. For the newer decade, we got Smothering Tithe and Dockside Extortionist. I wonder which one of those two categories is going to be.
I mean, people shove Dockside into any deck that can run red for good reason, and Tithe. They're such good cards. The power is off the scale for all of them compared to basically so many cards that could have been even printed in the 10 years before that. I think it's just a landslide considering that new wins.
I mean, Dockside is, I would say, almost unquestionably one of the 10 best cards in the entire Commander format. So, of course, it's going to crush whatever it goes up against. So that's a landslide victory. However, the overall winner for this category is actually the olden times. I don't know what we want to call it. 2004 to 2013, they have scored a W, and they are up 1-0 as we move on.
Moving on to the next category, a type of card that I don't think enough players play enough of in Commander, it's spot removal. 2004 to 2013 brought in cards like Path to Exile, Pongify, and Rapid Hybridization, which are all amazing cards in their own right.
Pretty good.
But compared to the Deadly Rollick, Resculpt, and Reality Shift, I think that's a no-brainer considering Deadly Rollick can be free.
Deadly Rollick's kind of a messed up card. I think it carries a little bit, like Resculpt and Reality Shift are definitely staples. They're maybe not the number one draft picks in blue like Pongify and Rapid Hybrid, but they all kind of show up the same amount. And I do like Deadly Rollick, I think, more than Path to Exile. So I think they slightly edge out the older cards. We can move on to like Artifact and Enchantment Destruction. This gives us like Wear Tear and Nature's Claim in the older category versus Rexage, Boseiju, and Druid of Purification in the newer side. I think as good as Nature's Claim and Wear Tear are, oh god, it's a landslide. Boseiju is a pretty messed up Magic card.
I'd say Boseiju is the best card to come out of that set, even as someone who likes Farewell so much. But Druid hits 3 things, and I just really wish that the Wear and Tear cycle were a little bit better. They were just a little bit...
Oh, the Fuse cards?
Yeah,
they were pretty bad.
I think they're just, incredibly underwhelming, and I wish they were better, considering like things like Boseiju have dual uses, if you want it as a land or a channel ability.
It already is. You know what? Fuse cards
MDFC.
were the pre-MDFC MDFCs.
Honestly, though, but I do think that when you're comparing those to the things that have come out recently, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, if we're looking at catch-all removal spells, Beast Within and Chaos Warp are the heavy hitters from the older decade, but the newer decade brings us Generous Gift, which as far as I'm concerned just cancels out Beast Within. Then we get Assassin's Trophy and also Deflecting Swat. Deflecting Swat I threw in the removal because that's generally what you're doing is you're changing the target of a removal spell to something else, so you're kind of like almost like a counter spell, but more of a targeted removal-esque type card. And I think once again we are now seeing a trend in spot removal anyway. New decade destroying the old decade.
I really think so. I mean, consider like Stroke of Midnight too. That's just riffing on Generous Gift, which is basically just Beast Within. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's even as that one is another one. And Excise the Imperfect is another example that didn't even make it. What about counterspells? Surely the older counterspells are better than the newer ones.
The older counterspells are things like Swan Song and Negate, which are played a fair amount, but when you have things like Fierce Guardianship and Offer You Can't Refuse and Force of Negation, when these counterspells are 1 mana or free at times, and that is just... I mean, everything comes down to CMC in the long run in Commander, so those really take the cake.
Counterspells, especially in spot removal, get exponentially better the less mana you have to pay for them. So these cards just crush it. And I was actually surprised by this one, because in my head, when I think, go back 10 years, and then from that 10-year span, tell me what counterspells there were, I would have guessed there'd be more free ones, but those all occurred in the first 10 years of Magic. So we have like the first 10 years of Magic that we're not really talking about because there wasn't really power to creep. Then that crept version from 2004 to 13, and now 2014 to now, and I mean, they've printed some busted counterspells.
I was definitely thinking about that too while we were making this. I was thinking about like, oh, where's Soul Ring? Super old. Where's Force of Will? Super old.
That's why I thought this would make it more fair, comparing decade to decade to see how things have crept over the past 20 years versus just including all the broken cards they made in the beginning when they were still testing out the limits of the game.
I really think that within the last 2 categories, though, the fact that we are playing a Commander-based format and there are free Commander-based spells really just, that just really pushes the needle into the newer direction.
I know exactly what you meant, but I do think that Commander is a Commander-based format. I would say that. So the winner is New, which brings us to a 1-1 tie. That lets us move into the predictable third heat, card draw. The olden days bring us Skull Clamp, Consecrated Sphinx, and Mole Drifter. Skull Clamp and Sphinx are pretty messed up. Mole Drifter was like a surprisingly big drop to third place, but it is a highly played card. And I would have guessed, if you would have told me those three cards are going up against, three random cards, I would bet on the first one to win. But they're not going up against three randos. It's three of the best card draw from now.
It is the One Ring, Esper Sentinel, and Jessica's Will. Things that are played in so many decks that can just run them. The One Ring is the best card, in our opinion at least, to come out of 2023. It can go in any deck, and it's such consistent and great card draw, and it gives you protection and indestructible too.
These are three of the best cards in the format, and they are kind of crush Skull Clamp, Sphinx, and Mole Drifter. Even though Skull Clamp, what a design mistake. I think the One Ring is better than Skull Clamp, though.
I think so, too.
Sheesh.
And Mole Drifter honestly reminds me of the, it really is a staple of the 10 years prior to...
Quintessential, 2010 card.
It gives me, acidic ooze vibes.
Acidic slime, yeah.
Yeah, acidic slime. It just gives me those vibes.
It really does.
Troops, it's just of those days.
Hey, Chupacabra, he's on our Zoomer side.
Really?
Yeah, he's from Rivals of Ixalan. So let's go to the, I put this as, conditional card draw, the next category. It's Notion Thief, really messed up card. Mentor of the Meek, Tokens card, they like it, and Disciple of Bolas. One thing Wizards has really been trying to do lately, as you will see, is upgrade card draw. Apparently the ramp they have not touched as much, but when it came to removal, they severely upped things. The power creep is real. And then for card draw, we're going to compare those to the Great Henge, Beast Whisperer, and Welcoming Vampire, which I think is a clear winner. They are very consistent, and sometimes they do other things. Wizards has just been giving every color combination, except red, a little bit more card draw.
I think Notion Thief is one of those cards that's just hated out based on Rule 0 alone at times. So to say it's conditional card draw is true, but it's also a little bit tough because I think people get a lot more salty if you play it versus cards that have a higher power level, but you see them way more rampantly, like the Great Henge. It's mana, it's life, it's cards, it's counters. What doesn't it do?
Yeah, I think Notion Thief might be the best of these 6 cards. But Great Henge, Beast Whisperer, and Welcoming Vampire, I think all beat out the other 2. So it may be a little bit closer than the other heat. But the winner here, I think it's new cards pretty clearly. So it is now 1 point for Old Decade, 2 points for the New Decade.
But if you want to look at some new cards, come check out our Whatnot stream on February 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be giving away pre-cons from Murders of Karlov Manor. We're going to be building a deck and then giving it away too, and a full box of collector boosters and opening them on stream and then just giving them.
We basically, last time, were giving them away every 5 minutes. It was a storm of giveaways. It was so much fun. We were running polls. We were laughing. We were having a grand old time. Please come join us. It will be well worth your while. And if you haven't signed up for Whatnot yet, you can use our link in the description to get $15 as a little bonus.
Come hang out with us. Come have a good time. And maybe get something free out of it too.
So we covered the big 3, ramp removal and card draw, but we're going to get into a little bit of specifics, and we're going to start with this one.
This one is cheap creatures. These are not mana dorks. These are just creatures that you can play in the first few turns and just build your board presence and just gain incremental advantage. In 2004 to 2013, we have creatures like Stoneforge Mystic, Serra Ascendant, and Fauna Shaman. Serra Ascendant is still played a fair amount in Commander,
really
considering we do start at 40 life, and you can just gain advantage on turn 1, gaining a bunch of life every single attack cycle.
I do like Fauna Shaman and Stoneforge also for their tutor capabilities. They can do a lot. They're good cards.
They definitely have potential, but compared to the 2014 to now, it's just no competition. Esper Sentinel, Dothy Voidwalker, which can warp entire games around it, and Drannith Magistrate, which is just, I feel like that's the quintessential Commander stacks piece.
It is on the top, pretty much on the top of the list for the last 10 years of cards that people have been talking about that could be banned just because it so openly goes against everything the format stands for, play your commander. And he's like, no. So when you play Drannith on turn 2, or any of these cards on turn 1 or 2, they kind of warp the game. I think Stoneforge, Fauna Shaman, they're very good for you, but I don't think they warp the game in the way that the other 3 do. Serra Ascendant does warp the game quite a bit, but it just can't compete with all 3 of the rest of them. So I think it's a New Decade winner there.
I think it with Sarah Ascendant, it is a lot more easy to recover from someone having a big life total swing in the first 3 turns than if
like
you
card advantage.
Yeah, than running an Esper Sentinel turn 1 and gaining 5 cards off Rhystic Buddy, or having a Dothy out and the graveyard deck just can't do anything for 6 turns.
Or you can't play your commander for the first half of the game or something.
Yeah, it just really, really warps the game in a way that some people and just some games just can't recover from.
That takes us to the next little battle. We have Kasali Pride Mage, Baleful Strix, and Scavenging Ooze. They are going up against, no offense, guys, this is a tough one. I don't know if anyone could have won this one. Orcish Bowmasters, Ledger Shredder, and a Haywire Might. Those early utility creatures are kind of absurd. I'm not going to hate on the other 3, Scavenging Ooze, Pride Mage, and Strix, but they come down and they've got some uses and they are good for sure. But I don't even think you can question that these 3 cards that we just listed are messed up.
I mean, Baleful Strix, I'm still playing in a couple artifact-based decks.
I'm still playing all 6 of these cards, but which one's better?
Yeah, and Scavenging Ooze, I know you have in Fun Corridor. However, with Ledger Shredder, I've seen so much advantage out of that. Haywire Might, I have feared that card before when I put down enchantments.
Pretty much a strict upgrade to Pride Mage.
And just Orcish Bowmasters, I've almost died to a single Orcish Bowmasters because I've had Villas out. Mm-hmm. So it's just a really powerful effect. And for 2 mana at Flash, that's sometimes just unbeatable.
Yeah, so we do have a clear winner in the cheap creatures, developing your board state, which totally makes sense. We had Modern Horizons 1 and Modern Horizons 2 come out this year, and that was pretty much all about giving new creatures to the Modern format, which we go, oh, this scales with multiplayer? Over this way, please. Bowmaster, sure. Like Shredder, get over here. Dothy Voidwalker, fine. So yeah, the new cards are now up 3-1, but we're going to move on to the exact opposite category. Haymakers, 6 mana and up, big threatening things that are going to try to win the game or get so much value that everybody else will scoop. We'll start with the pumping category. This is 2004 to 2013. They bring us Elish Norn, Craterhoof Behemoth, that's a big one, and Gisela.
The more recent ones are Enray's Forerunners, Moonshaker Cavalry, and Kamal. Now, while these things are good, Moonshaker was called White Craterhoof. Mm-hmm. It's still not beating out normal Craterhoof, which is still played in so many decks. Elish Norn can function as a board wipe and a buff, and Gisela is, I think, the worst out of these.
Yeah.
But I still think it is pretty good, and I've seen it in more modern decks recently.
Yeah, these 3 new overruns can't really hold a candle to the older Craterhoof. Craterhoof is carrying that team a little bit. Elish Norn's pretty strong. To me, it just can't quite reach it. So I got to give this point to the old Haymakers. But the next little section is kind of Haymakers that give you a ton of advantage either on the board or through cards. So we have Mikaeus the Unhallowed, huge graveyard sacrifice master, Avenger of Zendikar, Army in a Can, and Protean Hulk. Depending on how you play it, if you sacrifice it, you win the game.
I think that Protean Hulk definitely fell off after Flash was banned, though.
In terms of how powerful it can be, yeah.
Ripperoni. But in the new category, we have Bolas' Citadel, Hullbreaker Horror, and the new Atali that you can never whiff from. Those Hullbreaker Horror has just dominated an entire game. I've seen you cycle baubles back and forth just to wipe the entire board. Bolas' Citadel, I think that's just, you win the game, especially if you have enough life, because we start at 40. If you can get it down early enough, you can just churn through your deck. And new Atali, don't even get us started on that. There's a reason it's so expensive and it's worth the money. But the fact that you can't whiff on it, the fact that it can be in your command zone and you can just keep blinking it to get those triggers left and right, those are really powerful, and we have to give it to the new category.
Yeah, Avenger Zendikar, probably the worst one. Hulk has a lot of potential. It's definitely very, very strong, especially if it says when it dies, you win the game. Mikaeus, really good card, can definitely combo. I just think that the impact Citadel, Hullbreaker Horror, and Atali have on the game, even if you have no reasonable follow-ups, if you're just playing spells, playing a couple spells off them, it just feels like you can't win. Hullbreaker Horror plus instant speed thing to either bounce whatever you're trying to remove it with or bounce the Hullbreaker Horror back to your hand just feels demoralizing. It turns Soul Ring and a 0-drop into infinites if you just have a Mishra's Bauble in your deck. New Atali is a 5-for-1 that you can flicker, and Citadel really never stops doing value, especially if you reset your life with Gary, or that also goes infinite with Sensei's Top and Aetherflux. So I got to give it to the new cards.
I know we joked about this before, but the Fairy Precon in Wilds had Hullbreaker Horror in it, and it completely ramped up the power of that deck from that single card alone.
So overall, in the Haymakers category, it's going to be a tie. The overruns go to the old decade, and the value goes to the new decade, which is not surprising because new decade seems to be all about value. So we have a tie. It is 1 win for old, 3 wins for new, and 1 tie. And 1 win, we haven't even mentioned this yet, from Moxfield.com, because when you go to build a deck on Moxfield, you're catching a big fat W every time because it's easier, faster, and smoother than the other redacted website you were thinking about using.
It is so easy to see all of the cards in your deck, or anyone's deck that has them listed on Moxfield. You use Visual Grid that we like to use, or lists, or whatever, and you can see the price next to them. You could see the mana value. You could sort them by type, whether it's like creature or land or whatever, or you can sort them by just the mana values in general, or you could just sort them by the tags that the user has put on. There are so many ways to organize decks and just look at them and just process that information with Moxfield.
Let's put it this way. Let's sort all the deck building websites, and then we'll rank them top to bottom. Moxfield's first, and then the gap and the pit between the next one is so high that I can't even see it. So let's do with that what you will.
Bye, redacted.
Time for the next battle. This is a token maker battle from 2004 to 2013. We have Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor. This category is all about doubling things, and I can't think of too many more infamous ways to double things. They're all pretty strong in their own right. I think Primal Vigor is a little bit janky, but these are definitely the best ways to double stuff from this decade. What about the new decade?
The new decade has things like Anointed Procession, Mondrag, Glory Dominus, and O'Hare Talk. All more recent ones in that decade. However, I think it's really tough to pick a what's better in here, considering there are pros and cons to each.
Yeah, I don't know if I could pick a winner from those three, Doubling Season side versus the new side, Mondrag side. They're all double in different ways. They all have upsides. They all have downsides. So I would have to just give it a straight up tie, and then we'll see the next more value based token makers if that can break it one way or the other. What do we got?
The next ones are Avenger of Zendikar, Rampaging Bailouts, and Bitter Blossom compared to Scoot Swarm, Field of the Dead. Don't worry.
I'm officially compromised.
And Loyal Apprentice. Now, I will answer for this one because BZ is swayed and definitely biased, but I also do agree that the new ones win. Scoot Swarm is incredibly oppressive if you let people get even a few copies out of it. Field of the Dead is so good, especially with multicolored decks.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. It's only been banned in 6 formats or something.
It's a pretty good card. I've heard good things.
And Loyal Apprentice, it comes down really early, and the fact that if you have your commander out, it brings out more Thopters with every single turn. These are just really good value engines, and they just make a ton more tokens than the other ones do.
Yeah, I mean, I won't comment on the Field of the Dead, Rampaging Bailouts matchup, but Scoot Swarm puts every landfall token maker to shame, and Loyal Apprentice, I think, also puts Bitter Blossom to shame. I do not think Bitter Blossom is that good of a card. I guess while we're at it, I don't even think Avenger of Zendikar and Rampaging Bailouts are that good. So for me, this was a pretty easy choice, but Loyal Apprentice making a token the turn you play it, having haste, and then just triggering again every turn, it really is much better than these slow, even better than Dreadhorde Invasion, these once per turn type cards. So the winner is new. After a tie, they win the only category that's left, and then it's now 1 victory for the old, 4 victories for the new, and 1 tie. We can move on to the Kindred payoffs. Mia, what do we got?
The Kindred payoffs. We are not going by individual cards here. We are going by number of cards that are printed for Kindred payoffs. In 2004 to 2013, there were 25 Kindred cards printed throughout that entire decade. These are things like Cavern of Souls, Distant Melody, and Door of Destinies, which are cards that are still played in Commander nowadays. However, from 2014 to now, there were 81 cards. Kindred Discovery, Kindred Dominance, Kindred Summons, Roaming Throne, Realm Walker, and Pact of the Serpent are just a few to name in this category.
Yeah, we searched choose and type on Scryfall. You can verify this. There's only 25. Wizards was not emphasizing this, in that world, and probably most of those are from Lorwyn. So Lorwyn did not have all the best, choose a creature type cards. But now they've basically made a deck for, vampires, elves, zombies, humans, dragons. Some of those supports didn't even really exist. There wasn't a humans deck in 2004 to 2013. That just didn't exist. There was no humans payoffs. Now we've got a bajillion of them, and there's plenty of creature types just like that. I think spiders is probably also one, depending on when those Ishkanah cards came out. But yeah, I think new decade crushes it. They got 5 Ws now.
But I know what you're thinking. What about board wipes? Which we have something to report on. From 2004 to 2013, there were amazing board wipes that are still played today, like Toxic Deluge, Blasphemous Act, and Psych Rift, which is one of the most unforgiving board wipes in Commander, period.
Those might be the top 3 in the format. I don't even know. I mean, and new, I might have to mention this because we do have a biased party. Farewell was printed in the last 10 years, as was Vanquish the Horde and Ruinous Ultimatum. These are pretty solid. I think Ruinous Ultimatum is a distant third to those. Farewell is very, very good. And Vanquish is about as good as Blasphemous Act. I don't know if it's better. I never really got around to, it's kind of hard to compare those cards directly. But I think Toxic Deluge and Psych Rift bring up the old board wipes to beat the best 3 that we have in the last decade. So despite Farewell's absolute dominance and amazingness, I think we got to give it to the old decade on that one. But I'll let you do the next heat.
The next heat is with the old board wipes, Damnation, Austere Command, and Chain Reaction. I think it's interesting that there's Chain Reaction here because I think that is a distant third to those first 2, but that is being compared to Cleansing Nova, By Invitation Only, and Time Wipe. With these, I really think that the old board wipes really just are the better of the 2.
I think so. I think what they did was, there was a few pushing the envelope cards or cards that were designed for standard, right? Like Blasphemous Act and Psych Rift, those were standard cards. Those were designed for different environments, and they just so happened to be busted in Commander when you scale multiplayer. They weren't thinking about Commander. Toxic Deluge, they were like, well, they broke it too far, right? They just kind of pushed it, and they didn't really know. It was kind of like the arcane signet of board wipes. Now that they know what they can and can't do, they're not pushing the envelope as much. Farewell was an outlier, but they're doing very safe hits. Cleansing Nova, By Invitation Only, Time Wipe, they're all totally fine 5-mana board wipes. You can get value by playing specific decks, but in general, you don't need to go for them. Damnation, Austere Command, Chain Reaction, just pretty solid across the board, so they win.
I think it's also really funny considering these were designed for other environments. Psych Rift was not considered a good card when it was printed. But overall, old is the winner in this category. So that is 2 wins for old, 5 wins for new, and 1 tie between the 2.
Time for tutors. We've got a couple different categories. So the first, I'll break it down. First, we've got creature into play tutors, then we have artifact tutors, then we have generic tutors, and finally we have land tutors. So for the creature tutors, the old decade's bringing us Green Sun Zenith, Chord of Calling, and Birthing Pod, all absolute bangers. You could throw Wargate in there, but it's 3 colors, so it's a little bit harder. They're going up against Finale of Devastation, Eldritch Evolution, and Fiend Artisan. These are pretty comparable.
I think Finale is really amazing. However, with the versatility of the other ones, just overall, I think the old ones do win. I think the power among the old ones are a lot more steady versus Finale being up here and then Eldritch and Fiend being kind of
lesser played. Yeah, Eldritch Evolution can do some work in CEDH, but I think across the board, we got to go for the old decade on that one. Next, for artifacts, we have Tezzeret the Seeker, Reshape, and Godo Bandit Warlord paired up against Whir of Invention, Goblin Engineer, and Urza's Saga. How do you feel about this matchup?
I think that the new one has to win here. Whir of Invention's really good. I think Urza's Saga is amazing.
It's a silly magic card.
Yeah, and Goblin Engineer I think is the worst out of the 6, but with the power of the other 2 holding it up, I think the power level overall is just higher than the old ones.
Yeah, there's no denying the playability of Urza Saga. Honestly, you could probably just jam that thing in any 1 and 2 color deck with Soul Ring / Mana Crypt / Skullclamp / top whatever, and it'll just be amazing. So it's hard to even rule out Urza Saga because it does objectively tutor an artifact, so gotta give it to the new cards. How about for the generic tutors or the non-restricted tutors for the old decade? Beseech the Queen, Liliana Vess, Runescar Demon. Once again, I will say, I thought this decade had a little bit more going for it, but I think that must have been the first decade of Magic.
Yeah, the Vamp Toots and the D-Toots are definitely the older decade of Magic. And going on to the newer decade of Magic that we have listed here, there are so many to talk about. There's Wishclaw Talisman, Sidisi, Beseech the Mirror, Hoarding Broodlord, Dark Petition, and Razaketh, just to name a few. So these are just really powerful tutors, and I think overall, it's just a no-brainer that these do win this category.
Yeah, there's not much to say. Old Decade didn't even bother showing up to this race. It's an absolute domination in that category. For land tutors, we got Knight of the Reliquary in the Old Decade, 10th with Discovery, and Scapeshift. Scapeshift, very popular among the Field of the Dead connoisseurs and the Valakut players, that sort of thing. Or just, you got a bunch of landfall, Scapeshift's going in your deck for sure. And the other two, a little little bit lesser played, but they get the job done.
I like how he says, Scapeship's pretty big around the Field of the Dead connoisseurs. Before this video, he goes, yeah, Scapeship is so good. I know what has to win this category. That is going up against things like Piers Whim, Elvish Reclaimer, and Reshape the Earth, which I think have a lot less homes in just decks overall than the first category.
Yeah, I like Piers Whim better than Template Discovery. Elvish Reclaimer and Knight of the Reliquary feel close, although I think Knight's better for most of the game. And the Reshape the Earth is clearly worse than Scapeshift. Like, that's not even, I mean, it's a good card, but it's not that good. So we got a tie again. This turns out it's creatures and lands for the old decade versus generic tutors and artifacts, which just kind of is a wash. So we have 2 wins for old, 5 wins for new, and 2 ties. Time for a juicy one. You were probably waiting for this one. It's lands. Let's go 2004 to 2013. Best of the best. What do we got?
We have Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, and Enemy Fetches for the older category, and we have the Neon Dynasty Channel lands, Prismatic Vista, and Mana Confluence for the newer cycle.
I think it's close. It's close. Those are all so good. We've got Command Tower Exotic as rainbows, Prismatic Vista and Mana Confluence as rainbows, although I think it's pretty clear Command Tower Exotic beat out Prismatic and Mana Confluence, so that leaves the 5 Enemy Fetches from Zendikar versus the 5 Neon Channel lands.
I think the Neon Channel lands are amazing, but I do think that the Enemy Fetches have more versatility and more homes, considering that when we think about the Neon Dynasty lands, 3 of them definitely have homes. Otawara, Boseiju, and Takanuma I think are really good. But the white and the red ones are a little bit rough sometimes, and I don't find even putting them in for plains or mountains is what I want to be doing sometimes.
I actually still like those as free rolls, but there's no denying, you say, how often do you want a Neon Dynasty land? It's like, all right, well, if you're playing 1 or 2 colors, definitely. How often do you want a fetch land? I've played fetch lands in monocolor decks, and obviously they get better and better the more you go. So I think fetch lands have to edge it out there for the old decade. Next, we have some dual lands, shock lands, check lands for the old decade, and falling off pretty hard, the next best cycle was like the bounce lands, yikes, versus the battle bond lands, the Crimson Vow Midnight Hunt lands that enter on tap if you have 2 other lands, and the triomes. Shock lands are the best of these, I think, but the check lands are, at this point, they used to be some of the best, but they are a little bit replaceable now, and bounce lands are a joke to me.
Bounce lands, I actively hate bounce lands.
1 in 100 decks,
I really don't like them, and I've always really hated them. But Battle Bond lands are just duels in Commander that you can't fetch. Midnight and Vow lands are basically the same thing
really
because
good.
You are keeping the hands that you can play those on, and Triomes are fetchable Triumph. Like, I think those just beat it out in the long run. I really do love Shocks overall as like the leading land, but everything else just falls right under it, and the other 2 in the old don't compare.
Yeah, let's go to utility, you could say. We got Urborg, Reliquary Tower, and Nykthos going up against Yavimaya, Urza Saga, and War Room. Ooh, man. Urborg and Yavimaya going head-to-head. They are close. They are comparable, but I will say Urborg is better. Reliquary Tower is kind of whatever, but Nykthos slaps so hard. And I think, despite Urza Saga being a messed up Magic card, War Room's a little bit more niche. So I would probably have to give it to the old decade on this one.
I do agree. I wish there were more cards like Urborg and Yavimaya. I do think that
the world's not ready.
They really aren't, but Urborg does take the cake. I mean, there's a reason why it's like more than double the price of Yavimaya too.
Yeah, I mean, take a decade back and now you got Cabal Coffers maybe in this race. Like, put me in, coach. Like, no, stay back there. But yeah, I think now the winner is going to be the old decade, actually, which I was a little surprised by. So that's 3 wins for old, 5 wins for new, and 2 ties. We're going to run the breakdown. Ramp, the old took it. Spot removal, we gave it to the new decade. Card draw, new decade. Cheap creatures, new decade. Haymakers was a tie. Token makers goes to the new. Kindred payoffs, not even close, goes to the new. Board wipes, old is favored. Tutors, it was kind of a tie, but you could give an edge to the new decade because they have such better generic tutors. And the lands was old. How do you feel about, that's because we got to wrap this up, how do you feel about the power creep over the past 10 years? What have we learned?
I think that when people do talk about power creep, there is weight to that argument. There are so many new cards that bring so much more value for your mana that you spent, and just overall the effects than old cards, as seen in these head-to-head comparisons, that I do think that power creep is quite real.
I gotta say, power creep is real, but it seems to be focused in some certain categories. We see like a huge spike in the value cards and the removal. We even saw, like, if you want to just talk about pumping your creatures, the old decade kind of had the upper hand on that. But when it came to generating stupid amounts of value and annoying your opponents by getting 5-for-1s every 10 seconds, it was the new decade, not even close. So I feel like there's definitely a huge trend towards get infinite value forever and never run out of a hand, right? Like you're never going to, in this new decade, have not like 6 cards in hand, it feels like, versus the old decade. I can remember top decking all the time. It's just the way Magic is headed, and I think it's totally healthy. But we're going to move to this video, which you could watch, which is the most needed reprints for 2024, because we got to see some of these cards again.